This is the map of Luminose City in Pokemon Legends ZA, and I have just one problem with it. And no, it's not the commonly said problem of it looks so small, because I think that's a good thing, actually. No, my problem is that there's no roads outside the city. And I don't mean in a we can't leave the city to go explore Kalos way either. Again, I think that's an okay thing. I just mean, why the heck are there cars? Because there's cars parked here, and we see more in the gameplay trailer, and there were taxis in X and Y, but like the entire outer city is surrounded by a wall of buildings. There is no way out for cars to leave. Maybe there's a way out behind this building or behind these peeps, but I doubt it. We see that you enter the city via public transit. Good on you, but is that the only way out? Oof. Anyway, that's not the point. See, I imagine there are folks out there disappointed or even worried about this game's map only being one city instead of a whole region of them like in Scarlet and Violet or even X and Y. But I'm here to tell you not to worry, because this is the best gosh dang city the games have ever given us and likely ever will for quite a while. I mean, look at the level of detail. I know there's a pretty decent chunk of the Pokemon fan base that rarely touch games outside of Pokemon much, if at all, and I'd imagine those are the folks mostly worried. But meanwhile, I'm like the opposite in both regards. Like, I am a Poketuber, yet Pokemon is like 3% of my total video game time, and I think by bringing in and explaining another favorite franchise of mine, I can get my points of this small urban map is good across better. So the Yakuza / Like a Dragon series is great in my opinion, even though the maps in these games are just a few city blocks. And not only that, but despite there being 6 numbered Yakuza games, 2 turn-based Like a Dragons, 2 Judgments, and others I'm probably forgetting, most of them are also fully or partially still in the same few city blocks, Kamurocho. Yes, the same few city blocks for several games as the map. Granted, there are some minor differences between them. Urban development here and there, a new park, a single new street, some businesses close while others open. They sometimes add new hiding spots for things too, and while the later games also introduce secondary maps which are just as big, the even later games will then also reuse those. And yet, having played all of them to completion, I never felt bored by the locations or the maps. Well, except for 5. Yakuza 5 was pretty boring, yeah. But let's stick with Like a Dragon and Infinite Wealth, because both of these games are the turn-based ones, and are chock full of Pokemon references as a result of that, down to there being an entire Pokédex, because you can capture and then use the people you fight in battles. All consensually. I even have a video explaining the whole Suji Dex in it. But anyway, so it's a small urban map or two. You can't possibly hide that many rare Sujimon or Pokemon in such a tiny space, right? Wrong. It was pretty difficult to complete the dex in this game because certain mon have interesting requirements for spawning or are very tucked away. And even in the post-game of most of the games in the franchise, I was still discovering new areas with hidden collectibles I missed. Not to mention, in it being an urban environment, it is dense. There is something interesting to do or see everywhere. Be it mini-games, enemies to avoid, enemies to fight, collectibles to find, shops, flashy lights, cars to not get hit by, countless side quests. Thinking some of the newer ones have an entire kart racing minigame, and the tracks are also in the same few city blocks. And I don't know about you, but I felt like quite a few areas in Scarlet and Violet were way too open and samey. Oh, what's over here? Grass? Oh, what's over here? Grass? Well, what? Oh, that grass has a bush in it. Aw, geez, this area doesn't even have grass. It's just a low-res dirt texture. The heck? Oh, well, there's cliffs. Yeah? You don't see cliffs every day, unless you play this game every day, in which case you do, because they are everywhere. What I'm getting at is that size doesn't matter. It's how you wiggle your worm, madame. And plus, as someone who's played every mainline Pokemon game, I welcome anything new. And a proper and densely interesting new urban environment is something new. When I played the Detective Pikachu games, I thought these city environments are amazing. There's so much world building to be done here, and it feels so real and lived in compared to the mainline games. Oh, I wish those Pokemon games could do that. Instead, we get copy and pasted blocks of buildings plopped into the wilderness, and they call this a town. More like a down. Let down. Kind of like Galar's wild area, specifically in hindsight. At the time, it was awesome because it was something Pokemon hadn't done before. But in hindsight, it's a pretty boring excuse for an open world zone. It's so flat, and the few interesting tidbits are far and few between. It's extremely samey, and like, you have all this space. What do they fill it with? Like 30 of the same gosh dang Pokemon just hanging out in the grass, standing there, doing nothing, hovering. It's like they realized their map is empty, so they filled it with the copy and paste button on the Pokemon themselves, but there could just be 2 Ghastly at a time instead of 12, and it would be pretty much the same. Actually, it would be probably a lot better, because then there could be a draw distance. Which is another point about ZA's Luminose City. Like Kamurocho and Honolulu in Like a Dragon, they have the power to look super good because there's buildings in the way. You can't see what's behind the buildings, so they can just not render it, allowing more numerous and more detailed stuff to be seen closer to you. From today's trailer, aside from a few visual oddities, I think it's safe to say this is the best mainline Pokemon has ever looked. And I'm positive the city environment is a big part of why. Looking at the map again, there's so much room for activities in this enclosure. Not just the main roads like in X and Y, but parks, footpaths, and the spaces between all these buildings, and all without being spread super far. I imagine there's just as much, if not more, to do here than there was in Legends Arceus, but all condensed, so you don't have to walk for 10 minutes through the same 6 patches of grass you've seen already to get between them for the 8th time today. Now, it is Game Freak we're talking about. They could mess this up, obviously. The things to do, collectibles to get, exploration to see, secrets to discover, danger to avoid, mini-games and side quests of Like a Dragon could all just be reduced to catch a Pokemon. Here. Which isn't bad. That's the reason we play Pokemon, obviously, but it just leaves a lot to be desired. Another thing that lets Yakuza, Judgment, and Like a Dragon all reuse the same few maps is that they have a lot of different interiors for changing things up, be it locations for the minigames or meeting certain NPCs, or even whole multi-floored office building interiors just for a single side quest. And on this map, we do see a few interiors. One is just the Pokemon Center and store, but the other looks like it could be a whole mall. I'd love to see that fleshed out, and for there to be even more not shown on the map. Lumiose is also based on Paris, which itself has one of the world's most famous sewer systems, as well as one of the biggest and most famous catacombs. Imagine a whole undercity area based on those. Not as big and fleshed out as the surface, of course, but speaking of, Lumiose is of course split into its 5 areas, and each of these districts has its own stylization. Roof colors mainly, but I'd imagine as we get closer looks at this, we'll see that there's at least mildly different architectural styles and color palettes, which I'm sure will relate to the sorts of Pokemon found there. I guess all I'm really trying to say here is that if you're worried about this game because the map is small, maybe don't. Plenty of other games have used even smaller maps, and yet they are fleshed out in a way that makes them still deep and interesting, arguably more so than miles upon miles of empty grass and cliffs with specklings of trees. But please, feel free to add to this conversation down in the comments. This is just my opinion, and while you're down there, consider becoming a member to support us. It literally keeps us going, and never stop using your noggin.